You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Hey everybody, welcome to 2023 as we tee off the new year. Just a little suggestion for everybody out there, something I've been doing in the last couple of weeks that Mike can do. I call it Kill the Noise January. So I've spent a little bit of time taking myself off all the mailing lists I never use or sometimes never subscribe to. I've been deleting apps off my phone that may ping me or cause anxiety or stress. But just
goodbye Candy Crush.
Yeah, exactly. No more Candy Crush. I already crushed that candy. I'm on a diet. I'm on a Candy Crush diet. So that's my New Year's resolution is to
do
less crush, less candy. So that's my suggestion is that, you know, it pops in your inbox and you delete it. But if it keeps coming in every week or every month, take a second, clean it out. It actually helps. It feels good to say no. We don't say no enough. But you know who doesn't say no enough is the new Speaker of the House, Matt Priest.
That was a brilliant segue, my friend. That rules package is proof positive that one Kevin McCarthy does not say no enough for sure. And so to bring in Thomas Crockett to this conversation, the three of us all having worked on Capitol Hill at various points in our career, Andy the longest at a decade, Thomas second at 5 years, and then myself for 3. We have some inside knowledge just based on the process, but we were all kind of texting last Friday night about, you know, in the wee hours of the morning about what was happening on the House floor. And this is like setting us up for one of the craziest years, I think, politically, that we've seen in a long time.
That's saying a lot.
It is saying a lot. And let's put it this way. If your vote takes 15 rounds and it hadn't happened since the Civil War, then you know this is an arbiter for things to come for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting. It's historic for one thing. You know, you mentioned the Civil War. This is only the second time this has happened since the Civil War. We had one back in 1923 that went multiple rounds of a speaker vote, and that lasted for 9 rounds. This went 15. Now, if you want to look at the record, you go back to before the Civil War, 1855, when you came down to speaker's race between a guy from Massachusetts, a guy from South Carolina. Massachusetts guy ended up winning, but you can imagine that was pretty contentious on the eve of the Civil War. That went 133 rounds. So this was not the record, but it went to the early morning hours to get a vote. There were a lot of surprises. There were vote changes. It was very dramatic. It literally came down to one vote, and it failed. And then they went again and voted for the 15th time. So a lot of drama, a lot of press. I think the key takeaway is it really previews what the year is going to look like, because what makes this such a challenge is the margins are really thin. And we talked about this on an earlier episode. You can go back and listen to the one after the election, the midterms, but the Speaker of the House can only lose a handful of votes. It's 4 or 5 each time he brings up a piece of legislation. So I think we're looking at this potentially happening at some other key times of the year. We can talk about that, but this is not the only time that we could see this. And it really doesn't matter in the scheme of things like some of these other big ticket items like the debt ceiling.
Well, if we keep this in mind, Andy, as Thomas kind of laid out the slim margins, that's just to get it out of the House to where it will go and die at a democratically controlled Senate. I remember when we were up there 20 years ago, and at one point, I think the Republicans controlled both the House and the Senate at the time. The House had passed like 800 bills that went over to die and into the deliberative body that is the Senate. But there's going to be a ton of stuff that goes over to, if it makes it out of the House to get to the Senate, it's going to die as well. So you're going to have these big fights. Debt ceiling is, when we can talk about it, that's probably the critical one we can talk about for the year, Andy. But we're going to have all these fights on these bills that will never have a chance to get the president's desk anyway. So it's just going to be messaging. It's going to be a year of nonsensical messaging, to be honest with you. And that plays right into the hands of our social media darlings that are on both sides of the aisle that really play up this performative nonsense.
Yeah, the Congress is looking more like the Senate day by day, with the fact that you can hold up legislation, or, obviously not filibuster like you would in the Senate, but you have singular members having more power than ever before and influencing and making demands. And used to be it's just rank and file, and you would follow and follow the lead. And now you've got individuals who are very interested in building their databases and followings to raise money. And I see them less interested in legislation, policymaking, and those sorts of things. So it'll be very interesting. It'll be interesting to see how the new speaker's relationship with Mitch McConnell is. There was a huge fracture after the insurrection at the Capitol. There's been a huge fracturing as Mitch McConnell sees Trump weakening, and as McCarthy still is in some ways with Trump, and needed Trump's support to get the cuckoo caucus to vote for him and get it over the line. Trump was calling people on the floor at midnight to get them to switch their votes to president so that McCarthy could win. So you've got all these dynamics, right? External forces, internal forces. And as Congress, a new Congress comes in, as a reminder to everybody, you have to reintroduce all the bills that didn't pass the previous Congress. So we're looking at, again, new trade legislation that has to be reintroduced. There'll be new tax debates. And, it'll be interesting to see how conferences go. That's where the Congress gets together with senators, and they sit in a room and hash out what they think they can pass in each chamber and actually get to the president. So I'm hopeful, because I do see the Republicans really trying to get back to normal appropriation. So the biggest thing Congress does every year is just pass appropriation bills to keep government operations funded and moving forward. And the easiest ones obviously are like the VA, right? Everybody votes for the veterans bill. Defense is quite easy. And then you get into like spending bills around education or social programs. You start having these big fights, but they don't want an omnibus at the end of the year where it just is so large. So part of their fiscal discipline is that conversation around that. So maybe we can get some good positive inertia by them passing those bills, and maybe they'll be sane and not too much difference between them and the Senate. But beyond the appropriations on anything, we're going to look forward with social issues in the U.S., tax issues in the U.S. It just seems like it's going to be a stalemate, and it's already 2024 election cycle. So
I think the challenge too is, they pass those and then they head over to the Senate, and what happens to them. So you've got the criticism was putting everything in what is called an omnibus, which is like this giant kitchen sink bill. We actually had some positive things that were added to it, like an IP protection bill for footwear and other products sold on third party sellers on marketplaces like eBay, Amazon, and others. There's this was included in the omnibus, but it's got all the funding bills wrapped into one. That was the criticism. So that lasts through September of 2023, and then by that date, Congress has to have passed a lot of these smaller bills, which is what they want to do to try to do don't do funding in this big kitchen sink bill. Let's do smaller bills like we're supposed to do, where each, the Appropriations Committee oversees that and passes it through. It's not some big deal at the end. So can they actually do that like they plan to do? That there's going to be a key date at the end of the year to see what happens. Can they do that ahead of September? And if not, are we going to have what we did on the floor, where it actually really matters for American people? Because you're looking at, if you can't get funding issues resolved, you could end up with a government shutdown. That scenario, one thing to watch. The other is even earlier with the debt ceiling. It's July of 2023. Right now is when that's projected to need to be raised. It's basically if you don't raise it, the U.S. would default on its debt not long after. And so it's really an issue of, are we going to let the U.S. default, or are we going to keep raising the borrowing limit? So you can imagine a lot of these fiscally conservative members want to have that fight.
Yeah.
Are they going to do this again? You can only lose 4 or 5 votes. Are you going to do the same thing again with an issue of U.S. default? What does that do to the markets? What does that do to to the U.S. And so that's a really difficult issue coming up this summer.
Yeah, I think it, and again, in politicians are going to act like, guess what? Shocker, politicians, when the opportunity presents itself and there's a narrow margin to move something as big as the debt ceiling increase. And if you look at what Matt Gaetz did, the congressman from Florida, when with each vote for speaker, he sent out fundraising emails, right? So he's trying to gin up fundraising and funds to go towards his reelection campaign with each vote, because it was made for TV, right? And so he had a lot of attention on him. And he at one point told Sean Hannity, I've run out of things to ask for, going back to Andy's point about Speaker McCarthy saying yes to everything. And you can just imagine, as we approach the same landscape will be there. It'll be too tempting for these clowns, in all honesty, to not do what they are kind of, how they've typically functioned in their political careers, is to get attention, run to the cable news, jump on social media, send out the fundraising email with each vote, with each cutthroat, dramatic, slimmest of margin votes. And so I think, again, this is just a precursor of what's to come. And my hope is that, as we talk about the Footwear priorities, that there are some silver linings on things that might actually move at some point this year. But that remains to be seen for sure.
It comes back to the election, though, the midterms. It comes back to what we talked about before, where you predicted this big Republican wave where you're going to have this giant cushion of seats, and you can lose votes. It doesn't have to be a handful of votes. It can be 10, 20, 30 votes. It didn't happen. And so we end up with an incredibly small margin. And we talked about that, all the reasons behind what we thought, why that happened. But the reality is it did happen. And so that's what Speaker McCarthy has to work with. And it creates all these challenges, including, as you mentioned, for our priorities. We have miscellaneous tariff bill has been hanging out there for years now. We filed those requests, gone through a long vetting process, have been sent to Congress that would give some tariff relief for footwear companies. We've got generalized system of preferences out there. That is a tariff relief program, tariff preference program for certain developing countries. It doesn't include China and Vietnam, but other, footwear. It's 120 other countries. That renewing that program has been out there for a couple of years. And question is, those have usually had bipartisan support. I mean, we're talking very strong, 400 to nothing votes in Congress for these programs. But can that happen again in this environment is the question. Can that happen in the next few months? And that's really an issue that it's really tough to predict what's going to happen on either of those or any of our other priorities.
Yeah, so I think obviously we have to deal with this every single day and track things and see where things are headed. But it'll be interesting because McCarthy did put he is putting some more of the uber conservative caucus members on appropriations and other key committees. So we don't know, there's this kind of shadow document, so we don't fully know what he gave away. But I just remember when we were at our board meeting in December, we talked about this. We said, if he gets it over the line, it's going to be because he gave out a lot of candy. I use this again, but he's going to give out a lot of candy. Sometimes Congress is like Halloween, and sometimes it's like college. It's like Halloween and how much candy you have to give out to get votes for what you need. And sometimes it's like college, where you need a little bit of pressure at the end of the semester to get to get your essay written and cram for your finals and get things across the line. So, it's I don't think it's as bad as what we can imagine. We could see the government fully like jammed up. I think there'll be some things that get passed here or there because of the narrow margins. If the Republicans want to retain the House, they're going to need to actually have some progress. And remember the next cycle, the Democrats again are playing a lot of defense on the Senate side. So those folks also are having to think about that, like the mansions and those folks in the on the Senate side. So there's enough external weird political pressure where you could see people finding agreements, but it's not going to be a very productive Congress overall, where you see a lot of change or a lot of things pass.
Yeah.
It'll be kind of business as usual to keep the lights on, but they're going to be hoarding stuff in the back room. There's no cleanup here. They're just going to keep hoarding bills and ideas in the back room until there is a Congress where there's enough votes on both sides to get things done. So,
well, and I think there's a certain segment of the American people as well as the business community that appreciates that, Andy, because divided government is kind of a slower, methodical government. It does take a lot more effort to get things moved. The last 2 years have actually been pretty substantive, from moving the stimulus, the trillions of dollars in stimulus, to the infrastructure bill, to environmental provision. I mean, there's just been the Biden administration and the democratically controlled Congress have moved a lot of big ticket items, gun reform. So there's been a lot of that out there, and so I think this might be kind of a breath-catching exercise collectively for the government. While at the same time, the narrative that's out there right now on President Biden is that this pivot towards the center. You've seen it just with his visit to the border, and I think there are growing internal concern politically about how immigration is going to drag down on the presidency as he decides whether or not to run for re-election, and then I guess expectedly enters the race and kind of continues down that path. So that might lead, I think, to your point, to a few more kind of common sense things to get done, but not a lot of volume. It's kind of like those low volume trading days on the stock market. There might be things moving, but it'll be a pretty low volume few years. And sometimes the American people like that. They like that predictability, and we'll just have to see how that plays out.
There's going to be a lot of noise. There'll be more noise than ever. That. So just FYI, folks, I'm sorry, but if you want to know where global warming starts and emanates from, it's from the U.S. Capitol, from a lot of these folks, right? A lot of hot air coming out of there. You want to talk about cap and trade? Let's just cap the Congress right there, and trade out these folks and get some more people in or something. I don't know, but
it's pretty funny.
All jokes aside, I think we respect the folks who are serving in Congress, but we also have to hold them accountable. I mean, the old saying goes, you get the government you deserve, or you get the government you vote for. So it's a reflection of how diverse the country is. How I think in many ways, both parties are still trying to find their centers. I still think we have this huge, flank on the left and the right that have outsized megaphones. I think most people in the middle of America are raising their kids and going to work and serving in their communities, and they don't have time to go protest, or they don't have time to get super active, and that's why folks like us exist, so that we can do that on behalf of footwear workers doing the job, and then letting them know, cutting through the noise and saying, okay, this actually is really important. So when we send out emails or we send out notices and we say, hey, can you take action? We don't do that lightly, where I know there's some associations, and I talk to different people, and they've got 18 letter campaigns going at any one time, right? It's way overkill. But when we ask you to get involved, or we say, hey, this is a key thing, it's because we prioritize that, and we don't take it lightly, and we know we need full force then. So as we go through the year and we see things moving or not moving, or just generally, stay close to FDRA. And when we make a request, we make it as simple as possible, as just filling out your address and basic information and clicking a few buttons. And you can send a letter to your senator, to your member, to the White House on different topics that we're trying to fight on. As well as, now the Congress is reopened, in terms of you're able to get into the Capitol now. You're able to get into the member offices and walk around and have face-to-face meetings again. So
good.
We're lacing up for that. And if you're willing to come into town and do that and talk to your member and senator on the issues important to you and your company, we'd love to have you come up here. You talk about like 10 years in Congress. My start was staff assistant. So I got coffee, I arranged the newspapers, I got dry cleaning, and I gave Capitol tours. So if anybody wants to come up, I still got some zingers, some half truths about what happened from ghosts in the Capitol and everything else. So,
and you'll provide all of those services still to this day for anyone who decides to come up.
That's right. I still have all the lies that I maintained from Congress. So I still have that. Thomas, is there anything kind of last word you think of before we wrap up this episode of just a preview of what we're seeing?
I think just to echo that unpredictability, we've got some really big things hanging out there, including tariff relief, other IP bills, things that would benefit the footwear industry. And it's a very unpredictable environment. There's a lot of times we'll need quick action on things. We also have a weekly call every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. If you're an FDRA member and for some reason you're not on that call, make sure you sign up. It's on the main website. You can sign up. Or we also do a lot of quick hit newsletters and updates. Be sure you're getting those because, there's some chances for some good big items as Congress tries to show that things are normal and we're avoiding what happened with the speaker vote. But then there's some times when there could be some repeating of that. And so we want to keep you informed in real time. So make sure that both the updates and the weekly call, make sure you're plugged into both of those because we will keep you updated every step of the way.
All right. With that, again, stay close to FDRA and we'll help track this. I mean, I think my hope is, if you have like resolutions or whatever, my hope is most Americans stop watching so much cable news and all the talking heads. You got folks who will cover national security and then education policy. I don't think so. Like, it doesn't work that way. Experts stay in their lanes. Talking heads will cover anything, right? It's like, I love Stephen A. on ESPN, but when he's covering the World Cup, no. I don't need his opinions about football, soccer, or whatever you want to call it. Like, NFL, NBA, yes, 100%. So it goes across the lane. But my encouragement is, it's better to read articles because you can scan it and quickly get out of it. But don't go down the rabbit holes on some of the cable news networks. It will only raise your anxiety. And if you ever have questions about what's happening or you want some inside baseball, just let us know. We're happy to provide that for you. So anyway, folks, as always, shoeandshow.com is the website. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, anywhere and everywhere globally. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to us this week, kind of banter a little bit about what we're seeing. And again, we hope to see you in DC soon or on one of our calls soon as we keep tracking these things that are uber important for our industry. And with that, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.